Hey, what's going on, y'all? Welcome to the Endless TBR. My name is Christian, and this is my YouTube channel where I love to talk about books. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to click on this video where I'm going to be doing my June 2026 reading recap and ranking. I'll be ranking all of the books I read in June from my least favorite read to my favorite. I have 10 books total that I read, although I'll be combining two of them into one and just ranking 9 different books. Before we get started with the ranking, I'm going to show you what I read so that way you know what I'm working with. I read 5 audiobooks and 5 physical books. Starting with the physical books, we have Red Rising by Pierce Brown, Cujo by Stephen King, My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix, Heart Shaped Box by Joe Hill, and topping it off, we have New Moon by Stephanie Meyer as my nostalgia read of the month. And then on the audiobook side, we have Children of Dune by Frank Herbert, Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, The Unseen by Anya Alborn, and then two Becky Chambers books called the Monk and Robot series. The first book is called A Psalm for the Wild Built, and the second book is called A Prayer for the Crown Shy. These are both very short books, and they pretty much continue the exact same story, so I decided to combine these two into one for the sake of the ranking. All right, now let's get into it. As I said, I'm going to rank all of these books in order from my least favorite read to my favorite based off of my personal preference. It was a solid month. I would consider my reviews for every single book on this list to be favorable. If I gave it above a 3.3 out of 5, then I would consider it to be a good review, and at least every book on this list made it to a 3.25. So let's get into it. Let's talk about these books. So coming in at ninth place is going to be Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. There's a lot that I love about this story, and then there's a lot that I don't love about this story. Namely, what I do enjoy is the world building and the fantasy elements. I think Rebecca Yarros does a great job at creating this world, the Kingdom of Navarre, how it's organized into these different factions, how society has to kind of place themselves into these factions and contribute to the larger war effort and conflict that the Navarrans are in. And that's especially true of the Dragon Riders, of course. That is like the main faction that we're focused on in this book. The dangers and the perils that these people have to go through to try to become a Dragon Rider, to see how high regard they place Dragon Riders on like their social pedestal. All of that I found to be very cool, and especially like the Dragon Rider binding process, and then the signets and the magic that they can wield. All of that I found to be very cool and very unique, and I do like how Rebecca Yarros writes her action. It is thrilling, it is captivating, and I definitely wasn't bored throughout any sequence when the characters were going through these different trials to try to become a Dragon Rider. The two aspects of the story that I didn't love, the first one is very much a personal preference of mine, but it is those long drawn out sexual encounters. I'm going to compare this book to the ACOTAR series because it's kind of the only other romantasy series that I've read. It's the only other thing I can kind of compare it to. But that was a gripe of mine about ACOTAR as well. I feel like Fourth Wing doubled down on those sequences, especially when you relate like the first two books in the series. Some of the sequences in Fourth Wing were extremely long, and by the time I got like 15 to 20 pages in, I was like, all right, Rebecca, we get it. Let's wrap this up. Like I said, that is just a personal preference of mine. If you love those intense romance sequences, then you'll probably appreciate that aspect of the story a lot more. But then the other thing that was a little more major for me was just the characters in general. I didn't really ever fall in love with Violet and Dane and Xaden and all the characters, the main characters in this story. I understood them, I understood their motivations, what their drives were, but I never really can say that I loved them. I'll compare this again to ACOTAR when you have like that main crew in those books, the Night Court crew. You have Rhysand and Feyre, Asriel, Cassian, the Morrigan. I eventually formed a very strong bond with those characters and fell in love with them, and they were kind of like the main draw that kept bringing me back to those books. By the end of book one in Rebecca Yarros' series, I never felt that attachment to those characters. I will keep going with it. I am going to read the second and third book, and hopefully, as the series continues, I'll feel more of an emotional draw to those characters. But it just never reached that same level that it did for ACOTAR, and so unfortunately, this book is going to end up at the bottom of this month's list. Coming in at number 8, I'm sorry, this is not the best month for romance, but we do have New Moon by Stephanie Meyer. I'll say a lot of the same things about this book that I did about Twilight. This is an easy story to read. It is fun. I do enjoy the characters and the overall plot. New Moon, I guess, is kind of like my guilty pleasure reading because I am thoroughly having a good time going through this series. Overall, I do think I like this one just a little bit less than the initial Twilight book. New Moon is longer, and the thing that surprised me about Twilight was just how succinct and quick the story was. Like it had a very rapid pacing to it. New Moon is a lot slower. There's a big chunk of this book that just deals with Bella trying to seek these adrenaline rushes by jumping off of cliffs or riding motorcycles or interacting with mysterious strangers on the street to try to get these rushes so that she can hallucinate the appearance and the voice of Edward. And that whole kind of like middle chunk of the book was a little stale by the end. I was ready to move past it. I did like the addition of the werewolves, though. I do think the whole werewolf versus vampire conflict is one of the cooler parts of this series. I love how the werewolves and the Cullens are always kind of like at odds with each other, and then you have these other forces like Victoria and the Volturi in later books that are kind of what brings them together and forces them to see beyond their differences. So the introduction of the werewolves in this story was very welcome. I will also say that this book made me much more Team Jacob than I had initially been. I haven't read these books in a very long time, so I've been kind of going off of the movies for many, many years. The movies made me much more Team Edward, but after reading Twilight and seeing how much of a jerk Edward was in this book, and then you have Jacob introduced really in this story, and he's much kinder and much more of a gentleman to Bella. Don't get me wrong, he still has red flags. Jacob cannot take no for an answer in this book, so that is very concerning. But overall, I found Jacob to be a breath of fresh air in this story as opposed to just how mean Edward was in that first book. But overall, again, New Moon, not the greatest book in the world, but I would be lying if I didn't say I was entertained by this book, and it is a very quick read. And yeah, just something about the characters and the story of Twilight. Like I've always enjoyed this story. So that is New Moon coming in at number 8. Next up at number 7 is going to be The Unseen by Anya Alburn. This is probably the biggest mixed bag of the month for me. On one hand, there's an aspect of the story that I thought was incredible, but then the rest of the story I found extremely frustrating. So the premise of this story is that there's this married couple. Their names are Isla and Luke. They have 5 children together. They're expecting a 6th child, but tragedy befalls them and they lose the 6th child. And Isla goes into this deep depression. She has a history of some mental illnesses. She's been institutionalized before. And so Luke is doing everything in his power to try to make her happy and ease off some of the depression that she's feeling after losing this child. And then one day, out of the woods near their house, wanders this boy, and he is clearly very malnourished. He looks awful. His limbs are all bent at different angles. They think he might have been abused, but they can't find his parents. They don't know where he came from. And so Isla, kind of, in the midst of this depression, decides to adopt this boy and name him Rowan. Luke is very much against this, but he wants to make his wife happy. And from day one, Rowan just starts causing all kinds of bizarre things to happen in the house. He is terrorizing their 5 other children and just making them super uncomfortable. And Isla, for some reason, will not blame Rowan for any of this. She seems to have this hyperfixation on him. She is obsessed with making sure that he is like safe and happy and comfortable in the house. Meanwhile, Luke very clearly sees that this boy is messed up and causing all kinds of issues for his children, but he refuses to say anything. And that is like the first 80% of this book is Rowan causing chaos in their house. And I was so frustrated reading this story. I was like, why is this happening? Why are these the worst parents ever? They have 5 children that depend on them, some of them very young, and they're just letting this random boy that wandered out of the woods near their house just tear their family apart. But I did keep going with the story mainly because this was a recommendation from my fiance and she kept saying just power through it, get to the ending of the story. And as always my fiance is right. I got to the end of the book and it was one of the most disturbing and haunting endings I've read in a very long time. I don't want to spoil anything because I do think it's worth experiencing on its own, but there is an explanation for the parents' behavior at the end, and I found it to be very unique and very cool. And like I said, it's just one of the most disturbing endings that I've read in a long time. I was just left with my mouth open, like, wow, that was unexpected and very interesting. So if that sounds like something you can power through, if you can power through like 80% of a book, and it's not a very long book either, I think it's like 300 pages, but if you can power through the first 80% of being just frustrated and aghast at these parents' behavior to try to get to an ending that I thought was incredibly cool, go for it. If that sounds like a miserable experience to you, I don't blame you either. I almost DNF'd this book multiple times, and if it wasn't for my fiance, I probably would have. But that is The Unseen coming in at number 7. Overall, I had to give it a good positive review because of that ending, but man, the first half or the first 3 quarters of this book were incredibly frustrating. Coming in at number 6, this might be an unpopular placement for this book because I've seen this very high on people's rankings of Stephen King books, but coming in at number 6 for the month is going to be Cujo. Now we're at the point of the list where everything from this point onward I really like. I really enjoy Cujo. I think it is overall a good book. When it comes to my Stephen King ranking, though, I've read 20 books by him. This is my 20th, and I would kind of put this one in the middle, maybe slightly above the middle, but it's definitely nowhere near like my top 5 or anything like that. The story follows a bunch of different human characters, but kind of like the main appeal of the story is this Saint Bernard named Cujo who contracts rabies and just becomes this like vicious killing machine and starts to terrorize and murder people throughout this small town of Castle Rock, Maine. And when the book is focusing on Cujo as the dog, there are some like sections of the story that are told from his perspective as he loses his mind. Those sections are thrilling and terrifying and heartbreaking and all of the different emotions that you can feel as you see this dog descend into madness and begin hunting and killing people who are absolutely terrified of this like 200-pound beast coming at them in their homes. And that is the part of this book that I wish Stephen King kind of focused on the most. There's a lot of emphasis on the human characters. The human characters are well written, like they are good characters, well fleshed out, very sympathetic in many ways. But it focuses a lot on their relationships. Like there's this husband and wife who are going through this marital issue because the wife cheated on the husband, and they have a kid that they're trying to like figure out, how to navigate this relationship with a young child. There's this other couple where the husband displays these very abusive and toxic behaviors, and so the wife is trying to remove their child from that situation. They're actually the owners of Cujo, and so the wife is trying to get the child away from the father and start like a new life. And so, like I said, a lot of focus on human characters, done very well. I mean, Stephen King is a master at writing characters, so that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. But for me personally, every time we were focusing on these human characters and on their stories, I couldn't help but just want to get back to the bloodbath involving Cujo and where he was in the story. And I think it's going to come down to a lot of personal preference. If the human characters work for you a lot and kind of the jumping back and forth between those stories works, then I think you'll love this book. For me, I kind of wish this had been more like a novella that was just all about the adventures and the misadventures of Cujo, I should say. But overall, it is a very well written book. It is entertaining, and I just wish it had been more about the bloodthirsty rabid dog and a little less about the human characters. Coming in at number 5 for the month is going to be My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This was my second Hendrix book, and this book is just pure fun. I love this story. The plot revolves around these two best friends. Their names are Gretchen and Abby. They've been friends since they were very little. Now they're older. I think we're catching up with them in like 10th grade when they're in high school, and they decide to go out to their friend's house in the woods and drop some acid and party. Gretchen goes missing for a few hours, and when they eventually find her, she's like, I'm okay. She says she's okay, but clearly something's a little wrong about her. She's shaken. And then as the days play out, something is clearly wrong with her. She starts to display very aggressive and distant behavior. Her personal hygiene just dives off of a cliff. She never changes her clothes. She starts to smell horrible. And her relationship with Abby is strained to the max and eventually snaps. And a lot of this story is about Abby trying to figure out how to save her best friend. She starts to suspect that Gretchen might be possessed by a demon. And so she's trying to figure out, how do I get this demon out of my best friend, get her back, and save her from this just like terrible rabbit hole that she's descending down. And what I love about this book is how Hendrix just manages to balance a lot of different tones. You have a strong emotional element to this story, the friendship between Abby and Gretchen. I found myself very easily relating to Abby as a character as she's witnessing the downfall of her best friend and just the sadness and anxiety that that's causing her. I put myself in her shoes, looking at my best friend, and if these things were happening to him, I would be distraught as well. And so there's a strong emotional pull there, but there's also very intense horror moments. Something I'm learning is that Grady Hendrix does a very great job at describing disgusting visual imagery, and there's no lack of that in this book as well. So if you're looking for those gross out horror moments, they are in here. And then I love the humor in this book as well. I'm not a big humor person. I don't really laugh out loud when I read, but there's a character in here named Brother Lemon, who is utilized to try to get the demon out of Gretchen. And I thought all of the sequences with him were incredibly funny. So yeah, I would describe this book as just a really fun ride. It was a book that I had a smile on my face a lot while I was reading it, despite some of the more disturbing content within the story. I just think it's well written. It is a it's a very good sit back, relax, and enjoy a story type of book. So that is my best friend's exorcism by Grady Hendrix. Coming in at number 4 for the month is going to be Children of Dune by Frank Herbert. This was a reread for me. I'm currently going back through all of Frank Herbert's books and listening to them in audiobook format. And as always, I love this book. I love everything that Frank Herbert has written, and Children of Dune is definitely no exception to that. And the thing I love the most about the story is just the politics, the drama. It's kind of what I love the most about this original Dune trilogy. But in this book, you have Aaliyah on the Imperial throne. You have a lot of different factions threatening to take her down. You have some factions within the Fremen that are dissatisfied with what the Atreides have done. You have the remnants of House Carino that are trying to assassinate the children of Paul Atreides. And as always, Frank Herbert does just such a great job at writing politics and thrills and philosophy all packed into this very dense story with a ton of different character motivations. But the thing I think I love the most about this story are some of the characters, especially you have Leto II and Ganima, their relationship and their bond together. Leto II is probably my favorite character in the entire Dune saga. I love what he becomes later on in the story and then into God Emperor of Dune. In the beginning of this book, he's like this 10-year-old. Him and his sister are so wickedly smart and they just talk circles around everybody near them. So you can't help but fall in love with their characters. But then, besides Leto, who I already loved going into the story, I think upon a reread, the character that really struck me was Aaliyah. She is such a tragic and heartbreaking character, and I love everything that happens with her in this book. She has succumbed to abomination, so she was born in the womb with with the awareness that a Reverend Mother has. She can listen to all of the ancestors throughout her genetic lineage, and the problem is when that happens, the children kind of fail to produce their own sense of identity, their own ego, and so these genetic memories can kind of influence them and turn them into what is called an abomination. And in this case, Aaliyah is being influenced by the genetic memory of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, who is still out to try to take down the Atreides bloodline. And so seeing her internal struggle as she tries to both rule the Imperium while dealing with these external factors that are trying to take down her and her family, and then also dealing with that internal factor of the Baron trying to bring her down. It was just very interesting to see her character and the things that she does and the struggles that she goes through. And I don't know if we're meant to love Aaliyah, but I definitely felt a lot of sympathy for her. And then, of course, going back to Leto for a second, I won't say too much about it, but the ending of this book is awesome. The revelations that Leto comes to, and then the steps that he has to realize that he needs to take in order to set the universe back on the correct path or the golden path, as he calls it. He does some awesome, badass stuff that lead into God Emperor of Dune, which is one of my favorite books in the series. And yeah, I just enjoy everything about this story. Again, Frank Herbert to me can really do no wrong. There's certain of his books that I like more than others, but Children of Dune is an excellent kind of bookend to this original trilogy, and I love the things that it sets up for the future of the Dune universe. All right, y'all. Coming in at number 3 is going to be Heart Shaped Box by Joe Hill. I have a short review of this book on my channel, but overall, this is a very fun horror novel. I was a little worried going into it because it is Joe Hill's debut novel. I think he published it back in like 2007, but I already read a couple of his books before diving into this one, and I was worried going back to the beginning would like the quality be the same. But turns out I was wrong. Even since 2007, since his first novel, Joe Hill has been writing incredible stories. The basis of this book follows this aged rock star named Jude Coyne. He's into collecting some really weird stuff. He has like this like human skull with like pens sticking out of it. He has like a hangman's noose from like ancient England. And one day his assistant comes over to him and he's like, "Hey, I found this like listing online of this haunted suit. Do you want to buy it?" Apparently it has a ghost attached to it. And Jude, of course, is like, "Absolutely, I want to buy the suit." And long story short, it turns out the suit is actually haunted and it was sent to Jude for a reason. This ghost that is attached to the suit is out for a vengeance and is now trying to kill Jude and everybody that he loves, including the young woman named Georgia that he is dating at the time. And so him and Georgia, in order to try to save their own lives, have to go on this road trip to try to figure out how to stop this ghost from haunting and killing them. And the thing that I love the most about the story is the relationship between the two main characters, Jude and Georgia. Georgia's like in her early 20s, Jude is like 50. He has this affinity for dating younger women. And in many ways, the two of them do not belong together. They have a lot of issues, but then at the same time, they bond so well in some of these moments where their lives are put in danger. And I loved the teeter-tottering between their relationship, between looking at them and saying like, man, this doesn't work. And then you have those moments where you're like, maybe she is right for him despite their massive age difference. Maybe there is something there. And I loved just the trials and tribulations that they go through in their relationship. Georgia especially is an incredible character. She has a lot of issues, a lot of pain from her past, and seeing her grow throughout this story, I thought was incredible. She's definitely one of my favorite characters of the year so far. But then the other thing I love about this book is just how terrifying it can be. I categorize the horror of this book as like jump scares on a page. Joe Hill does a great job at just describing like normal events, normal events, normal events, and then bam, something so bizarre and unsettling hits you. And he does this a lot throughout the first half of this book. And I thought it was just executed extremely well. And yeah, it turns out Joe Hill has just been an incredible writer from the beginning. I love this story. It's not one of my favorite Joe Hill novels, but it is definitely an excellent read and one that I recommend fans of his writing check out if you haven't done so yet. Coming in at second place for the month is going to be the Monk and Robot series. This was actually one I forgot to mention in my TBR video for the month, but it was my book club's choice of the month. And these books are the definition of wholesome, enjoyable reads. The premise for this story is pretty simple. It takes place on this inhabitable moon called Panga in the distant future. And on this world, humanity and AI and robots have been kind of commingling for a very long time. But at a certain point, the robots and technology decided to leave humanity and go off into the wilderness. So now humanity lives this very simple lifestyle, and they think that all of the robots have pretty much gone extinct. And the main character of the story is a non-binary monk named Dex. They are what is called a tea monk. Their purpose in life is to go around, listen to people's woes, and then make a brew of tea for them that will help them feel better. And Dex is kind of going through this life crisis. They want something more from life. They feel like they're stuck in this routine, this monotony, and so they decide to abandon their tea monking. I don't know if that's the right word to describe it, but abandon what they're doing and then go off into the wilderness on kind of this soulful journey to figure out what their purpose in life is going to be. And while Dex is out in the wilderness just reminiscing about life, they come across this robot named Moscap who is on his own journey. He is also trying to find purpose in his life. And the two of them band together and basically just go on this road trip where they encounter different beings and reminisce about philosophy and what it means to be alive. And like I said, it's a very simple premise, but something about it hit me really deeply. A lot of the conversations that the two of these characters have together brought out a lot of philosophical and existential questions within me, talking about what is life? What are we doing here? What is the purpose? Do we even have a purpose? Those kind of questions were very deep and thoughtful, despite it being a very whimsical premise. And it's hard for me to talk about too much more of these books because they're very short, so I don't want to give anything away. But as I mentioned at the beginning, wholesome is the word that I would use to describe these books. They are the perfect sit back, relax, enjoy a story with two beautiful characters that share an incredible bond as they go through life and ask these big questions. And I just found this to be a very satisfying series that I could sit back and just kind of let the weight of the world off my shoulders for a little bit while I experience these characters in this story. So yeah, if that sounds appealing to you, if you want to reminisce and ponder life through the eyes of this T-Monk and this zany robot as they go on a road trip together, I highly recommend these books. I thought they were very cute and very enjoyable. And coming in at number 1 for the month is going to be Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I love this story so much. I'm very excited to get into the second and third book of the series, hopefully shortly here. And I've been kicking myself in the butt ever since I finished this book because it has been sitting on my shelf for like a year. I was always hesitant to get into it because I didn't want to start like a new series at the time. And having finished this book and loving it as much as I did, I wish I'd read this book a long time ago. If you're not familiar with the story, it is about this main character. His name is Darrow. He lives underground on Mars, and him and his people, they're known as the Reds. They are told that they are the first settlers on Mars. They are there as the first people, and they're kind of terraforming the ground underneath the planet to make way for future civilizations. They are told that there's been this ecological disaster back on Earth that is threatening all of humanity, and they're the ones that are going to save humanity by making Mars a livable place. And Darrow's people have it extremely rough. Their job is dangerous. Their living conditions suck. I think at one point in the book, he was like, yeah, the oldest guy in the town elder, he was like 35. So they die very young because of the hazards of their job. But they've accepted that this is what life is and that they're doing a good deed by saving humanity. Well, it turns out that was all a lie. Darrow, through a series of circumstances, joins up with this kind of rebellion who take him up to the surface of Mars and show him that not only is Mars currently inhabitable, but it's been inhabitable for hundreds of years, and people on the surface are living this beautiful, elegant lifestyle full of resources and riches and entertainment, while his people suffer and die underneath the surface. And the society in the story is organized into this kind of caste system that is based off of colors, with reds being at the bottom and golds being at the top, and all these different colors in the middle. Golds are like the leaders of society. They control the military, they control the government. They are like superhuman. They're given physical augmentations to make them faster and more attractive and more physically fit. And then there's all these different colors in between. You have people like the greens who are in charge of technology, people like the pinks who are in charge of like the physical pleasure of the higher up people. You have people like the coppers who are kind of like in charge of lower level management. They're there to keep the reds in their place and keep them ignorant about what's going on. And so Darrow joins with this rebellion, and they say that the only way to take down the society is for Darrow to become a gold. They give him a bunch of like physical augmentations, and they send him off to this prestigious school where he can infiltrate their society and topple them from within. And like I said, I love this book. I love Darrow as a main character. I sympathized with him almost immediately, seeing all of the suffering that he goes through, that his people go through, thinking that they're creating a better world, and then the rage that he feels when he realizes that him and his people have been lied to and that they're suffering for no reason. I found him extremely relatable. But then the thing I love the most about this book is just the world building, this color scheme that Pierce Brown created to organize the society, and then the roles that everybody plays within the society, and the way that there's just this top down, like almost like fascism, like disgusting people at the top who are just obsessed with ruling the lower classes and making sure that they are in control. All of that caste system, all of that color system, I found to be so cool and so unique. And halfway through this book, Pierce Brown made a decision that I was pretty worried about. Darrow goes into this event, which I thought would be pretty short, but it turns out to be like almost the entire second half of this book. And I was worried. I was like, where is he going with this? I don't know if this is going to play out in a way that I found satisfying, but I was completely wrong. It turns out this event was awesome. I loved everything about the second half of this book. What Darrow goes through is meant to mirror the state of the society that he lives in, how society was organized, how these more vicious people rose to the top to control those underneath him. And it was a great metaphor for the golds and what their actual rule over the rest of the colors looks like. And by the end of this book, I thought it was brilliant and extremely well done. And my heart was pounding within the last couple pages of this book. And the second I put it down, I was like, I need to go buy the second and third book in this story to figure out how it all ends. So a great start to the series, an easy 5 out of 5 for me. I love the story. I love the characters. I love what Pierce Brown did with the ingenuity of it all, and super excited to get into it. This was definitely my favorite read of June. All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you guys had a good time. Let me know if you've read any of these books that I talked about. Let me know what you think about them. And as always, stay tuned for more book related content. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Christian. This is the Endless TBR, and y'all have a great rest of your day. Peace out.